If you ignore, resist, or stuff your emotions, they just get worse. I was the most terrible about stuffing my emotions. I thought, suck it up, Buttercup. You don't need to have these emotions. They are in the way. They are keeping you from being productive. In the United States, it really is the pursuit of happiness because we believe that if you're not happy, it's a bad thing. And what's funny is actually your emotions serve a purpose. They're not good or bad. Fear tells you if you're at the edge of a cliff, you ought to be scared because you need to be careful. Anxiety tells you if you need to take a test the next day, you should study for it. And anger tells you when somebody's crossed a boundary and you need to defend yourself. We've all heard of IQ, but there's also what's called EQ, the emotional quotient. And in a book by Dr. Bradbury and Dr. Reed, Emotional Intelligence, they describe the 4 facets of EQ. Self-awareness, which means you know how you feel. Self-management, which means you're able to control your reactions. Social awareness, which means you have the ability to read others. And relationship management, which means you know how to act with different personality types. So let's talk a little bit about these. Self-awareness. You feel bad and you don't really know why. Well, with your self-awareness, you can actually realize why you feel bad and then actually sit in it and know what you're like under stress or when you're tired or when you feel sad. Self-management is knowing when you're angry and actually being able to take a moment, take a deep breath, or count to 10 before you say anything or react. Social awareness is like seeing someone at a party and you can tell they feel awkward. You're reading their body language and you go over and you engage in a conversation. A bad example of social awareness is you've got a coworker that you can tell is overwhelmed and you go ahead and give her extra assignments to do. Relationship management is, you're dealing with a shy person. Well, you're going to be gentle. You're dealing with somebody that's sensitive. You're going to sugarcoat things. And if you're dealing with somebody defensive, you're going to be really careful how you share critical information. Emma McAdams is a therapist, and she has a series on YouTube called How to Process Your Emotions. I actually went through her series and used her workbook, and it's a really good resource. She talks about how to identify emotions. And so if you look at anger, that is the tip of the iceberg. Really, what is underneath the anger? There's shame, guilt, insecurity, things that really are making you act angry to protect yourself and to get people to stay away from you, but it's really something else down deep that's going on. Emma also discusses what happens when you avoid your emotions. It's like if Grubhub dropped off some food to your house and you left it sitting out on the porch all day long, and you basically just never bring it in. Well, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to have all sorts of pests. You're going to have bugs, rodents. It's going to stink. It's going to be a mess. Well, that's what it's like for us if we don't process our emotions. If we don't deal with them, they turn out to be a hot mess just like that. One way that you can process your emotions that was very helpful to me is something called the emotions wheel. And it divides your emotions into primary, secondary, and tertiary emotions. So some examples of this are, John criticizes my hair in front of a bunch of people, and I felt anger. But really, if we go through the emotions wheel and look at the other emotions, it was really, I was humiliated. The anger is just covering up the humiliation. Or if my coworkers are forming a volleyball team and they don't ask me to join, I feel excluded, I feel inadequate. But really, if we look at the reason for that, it is, I felt rejected. It's very helpful when you understand these things. Emotions can also be identified in your body. And I remember this always being very frustrating to me, especially if I went through counseling and tried to feel things or identify where things were at. And once I finally was able to tune into my body, sometimes that tells me what's wrong before my brain can tell me what's wrong. For example, if you have a tight neck or a tight jaw, that's anger. If you have a knot in the pit of your stomach, that's shame and regret. If you have a stabbing pain in your heart, that's sadness and despair. If you have shortness of breath or heart palpitation, that's fear or anxiety. Let me give you an example. I had a client that fired me, and one of my competitors got the account. And I remember I went home and I thought, gosh, I feel bad, but I don't really know what that is. So I said, well, let me use my body analysis to see if I can tell what's going on. And I was having some shortness of breath and some heart palpitations, and I had like a pain in my stomach. And I realized, well, that's shame and fear. So then I sat with that for a second and said, well, let me figure out, why do I have shame and fear? Well, I had shame for doing something maybe that I should have not done that made me lose the account, or not doing something that I should have done. And I had fear that my competitor was going to take all my business. So I had to look at those things and say, okay, what's real and what's irrational? And the irrational part was, my competitor's not taking all my business just because I lost one account. Let's get that in balance, get that in check. Sure, I ought to have a little bit of anxiety and fear over improving whatever happened that wasn't good, but I didn't need to go to that extreme. And the shame I'm feeling is, I'm going to take whatever I can do and improve, and I have to let go of the rest. So we're going to talk about, how do we process emotions? Emma McAdams has a process, and I'm going to go through it with you, and then I'm going to give you an example. First thing is to name it, whether you use the emotions wheel or you use your body to figure out what is going on, you name it. Secondly, you observe the emotion. How's it making you feel? How are you talking to yourself about things? And then you sit there with it. Now that is the hardest part, I will tell you. It is uncomfortable. When you're anxious, all you want to do is make it stop. When you feel sad, all you want to do is make it go away. But if you can sit there for a second, a minute, and just try to think about what's happening and what's going on and what's causing it, you're going to come a long way. And then clarifying, what can you control and what can you not control? And lastly, act on it, on what you can control, and then accept that emotion. So my example is, I had a girlfriend, she wanted to go to a race in downtown Austin. And I'm a little bit of an introvert, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, there's going to be all these people and all this traffic, and trying to find a parking spot is just going to be so stressful. And so I had all this anxiety, stress. I could tell I was going to be impatient. So I named it. That's what I had. I had those feelings, and I had to sit there with them and observe them and go, okay, why do I feel that? Well, you know what? It's pretty normal when you're in traffic and you're with a bunch of people and you can't find a parking spot to feel those things. And that's okay. And I had to clarify, well, you know, do I really have to do that to be with my friend? Is that going to make her like me less? Is it going to make her like me more? And I thought, you know what? No, I don't have to put myself in that circumstance if it's going to cause me problems. So I accepted how I felt, accepted that maybe somebody else doesn't feel that way, but I feel that way. And I took control, and I told my friend, you know, I want to be with you, but honestly, that environment isn't a way for me to connect with you anyway, and it creates stress for me. I'd rather just go eat with you after the race. Can we do that? It was a great resolution. Some other resources I want to talk about are things that can help you tremendously. There's something called an emotions tracker. And you can create this, you can make it on a piece of paper. There is one of these in your workbook. It basically has, what do you feel? When do you feel it? So you can do it every hour, you can do it morning, afternoon, evening, and nighttime, or however you want to break it up. Where do you feel it in your body? What do you think about that emotion you're having? And then how are you talking to yourself about that emotion you're having? It's a great tool to help you analyze what's going on and your self-talk and how you feel a lot of the times. You might notice, I'm anxious a lot in the morning, and you might be able to sort of process through, why is that happening? Adjusting your perspective is another way to deal with processing emotions. Is it going to matter in a day? Is it going to matter in a week? Is it going to matter in an hour? Is it going to matter in a year? Many times we get so upset over something and we don't even remember it an hour later. So why even go there? Then there's something called emotional zones. Our emotions, we've got to pay attention to them so that we react appropriately and we control our emotions. They do not need to control us. So the green zone is you're good to go. You're inspired, you're confident, you're happy. The yellow zone is be cautious because you feel a little anxious or insecure or threatened. The blue zone is take a minute. You're tired, you're hangry, you're sad, you're depressed. And the red zone is think before you act because you're jealous, you're frustrated, or you're mad. One last technique is what's called the locus of control. You identify what do I have control over and what do I not have control over. You can write it down on a piece of paper to help you work through the process. A great example of this is I'm at a party and somebody says something rude to me. Now, I have control over how I decide to feel. I have control over if I'm going to feel shame or feel bad. And I have control over, I can move on and go talk to some other people. I can't control what they said, but I can control how I feel and what I do. I want to say to you guys, if I only knew then what I know now, I would have been a better leader, a better employee, a better wife, a better friend, a better daughter. Understanding my emotions helped me to be a better person and understand others. The more you understand, the better you control your emotions. And you don't get hijacked anymore. There's a great freedom and peace that comes with understanding your emotions. You finally can look at yourself, accept yourself, and understand others. You can be a blessing to others and to yourself. So let's take control of our emotions.